The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Over the last few weeks, there has been some disagreement about the likely outcome of the midterm elections with regard to the U.S. Senate. Some pollsters saying it appears as though Republicans have a good chance at taking over control of the Senate, while other pollsters saying, you know, it really looks like Democrats are going to be able to maintain control. Now, two of the, what I consider to be the most accurate and should be the most trusted pollsters have said they believe Republicans will take control of the Senate in the upcoming midterm elections. These are, of course, Nate Silver as well as Sam Wong. We will talk first about Nate Silver. Nate Silver says that it is a 60% chance of a Republican takeover of the Senate right now. Sam Wong from the Princeton Election Consortium is recalculating from his previous assumption that it was only 25% likely that Republicans would take over control. It is expected that he will come out and say Republicans also will take control. Surprised, Lewis?
Not surprised. This is basically what we thought would happen. But Nate Silver, 60% as of now. Is that going to get higher as we get closer to the election or lower? I don't know. Yeah,
we will see how much more specific, how much more one-sided he gets. 60-40 is still not overwhelming likelihood. We had a number of terrible new polls for Democrats, 3 key races, Colorado, Iowa, and Alaska, where Democrats seemed to be slightly ahead and now seem to be tied or behind. In Colorado, Republican Cory Gardner leads the 4 most recent polls. In Iowa, 4 recent polls show either a tie or a 6-point lead for Republican Joni Ernst. And in Alaska, Republican Dan Sullivan leads the 3 most recent polls. The most important question to me, Lewis, about this upcoming election is, if Republicans maintain and or extend their lead in the House, and if Republicans do indeed take over the Senate, what will change politically during the last 2 years of President Obama's presidency? My view is nothing, because it will be Republicans still doing everything they can to prevent President Obama from doing anything, and President Obama doing what he can via executive order.
Probably. The focus might slightly shift from trying to prevent Barack Obama from doing anything to trying to prevent who they think the next Democratic candidate will be from having a chance.
That's the one area that I think is more the X factor, which is if Republicans really sink into true control of the House and Senate, what will the impact be on the election campaign for 2016? That is, to me, the bigger question. We'll talk to Bill Scher next week and ask him, what could Republicans do if they take control of both houses? I don't know that it's really going to be that much relative to what they've already been doing for the last 6 years, which is preventing President Obama from doing anything at all. This is a very interesting story from the NFL, Lewis, and I'm curious to get your thoughts about it. We've talked generally about how absurd it is for a player in a professional sport to thank God for a touchdown that they scored or for the fact that their team won and saying that they did it because it was God's will. I think that it is incredibly arrogant to think that if God exists, God is manipulating or deciding on the results of individual games, in individual sports, in one country, on one planet, in one solar system, in one galaxy within the universe. To me, that sounds a little bit arrogant, right? That's not something I buy into. However,
David, let me interject. I'd like to think that if God exists, he's a football fan. Let me just say that.
Okay, well, but that aside, Lewis, some players certainly think that God is very much involved in the minutia of professional sports. Of course, Christian Tim Tebow, known for very noticeable on-field prayer-like declarations and cheers after good plays and the like, and he's never been penalized for that in any way. Last night, Monday Night Football, I was watching the New England Patriots, my hometown team, get embarrassingly blown out by the Kansas City Chiefs when I saw Husain Abdullah of the Kansas City Chiefs, after scoring a touchdown immediately after intercepting a pass from Tom Brady, who I'm questioning what Tom Brady's future is in the league, more broadly speaking at this point, issue for a different day, kind of slide as he entered the end zone and do what seemed kind of like a Muslim prayer towards Mecca, right? That's what it seemed like. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. And then immediately after, he's penalized for unsportsmanlike conduct for what took place, for the play that took place. And there have been two reactions, Lewis, and I'm not playing the video because the NFL is so aggressive with claims of copyright violation that even though I believe we would be well within our fair use rights to play the clip and discuss it, I don't even want to open up that door. You can find the video online. One view, Lewis, is that Husain Abdullah was being discriminated against for doing something that resembled Muslim prayer, and as someone who is a Muslim, in a way that Christian players are not. Another point of view is that the penalty was because you're not supposed to engage in celebrations on the ground that involve sliding, even though the NFL rule is a little bit ambiguous about this, and that's why he was penalized. And the problem with that point of view is that we have on video countless other players who happen not to be Muslim who did similar on-the-ground celebrations who were not penalized. Lewis, I'm sure you saw it. What is your analysis?
Yes, I was with a group of people. We all saw it, and everyone's response was, did he just do some type of Muslim prayer?
Right.
And yes, it seemed that that's what he did. Now, Tim Tebow never fell to two knees. He did this one knee thing.
Well, that's exactly the issue. Why is that? Is that the distinguishing factor? The rule, I'll read to you the rule, Lewis. The rule is, it's vague. It's players are prohibited from engaging in any celebration while on the ground. Are we saying that there is an established definition of on the ground, which being on one knee does not fall under, whereas being on two knees does somehow? I don't know that that's written anywhere, right?
I guess that rule doesn't follow the same rule as being down in a play, right, where if one elbow or knee touches the ground, you're considered down. I guess you'd have to be on, I guess if you're only on one knee, you're not on the ground. But I mean, it also comes down to the individual referees and whether or not they deem something to be, to fit this rule.
I think there's no question, Lewis, that the NFL is going to have to issue a statement here.
Probably. I don't feel comfortable saying that this was because he's Muslim and it was a Muslim prayer.
I'm not comfortable saying that with certitude either, but it is very weird what's going on.
It is kind of strange. But we'll see. I'm curious to hear that statement.
For me, there's, like as I said, there's nothing more arrogant than thanking God for specific acts that you commit, that you participate in during a sporting event. However, if you're going to do that, we need to make sure that players are allowed to do it or not allowed to do it in the same way, regardless of what religion they subscribe to. It just seems like a fundamental religious freedom issue.
Yeah, I think it is. And, there are always going to be these rules in the NFL, like don't use the ball as a prop, no playing around on the ground, flopping like a fish. There's always going to be some gray area, I think. You
might remember back in January of 2013, Sweet Cakes by Melissa refused a lesbian couple looking for a cake for their wedding based on their religious objection, their so-called sincerely held religious beliefs, which were anti-gay beliefs. This was, of course, anti-gay baker Melissa Klein. Melissa Klein was invited to participate in a panel at the Values Voters Summit last week. And you may have heard that Melissa Klein closed the physical storefront of her business. It was in the aftermath of the backlash to her refusal to bake this lesbian wedding cake, but she chose to close her business, right? She chose to close it because, in part, she can circumvent the civil rights laws which make it illegal to discriminate against individuals based on their membership in protected classes, including sexual orientation in Colorado, by having only an online storefront. However, that didn't stop her from crying at the Values Voters Summit. She's so upset that she closed her business by her own choosing to circumvent civil rights laws around discrimination, but albeit a ridiculous reason for why she closed the business, she was still really upset. Here she is crying at the Values Voters Summit.
Sorry, I don't mean to get emotional. It just really touches my heart. But anyways, I would sit with them and I would sit and sketch up designs, and sometimes it would take, several different designs until we got the perfect cake that just matched them. And sometimes it would take 2 hours of sitting in a cake tasting. And if they chose me to do their cake, I'm sorry.
First and foremost, what does it say about the Values Voters Summit and so-called values voters and the religious right that you invite to your panel two bakers, it was Melissa Klein and her husband who were there, who denied lesbians a wedding cake? They're famous for violating the law by denying lesbians their wedding cake, and they're invited as some kind of, are they experts? Are they heroes? Are they victims? Why are they panelists at the Values Voters Summit?
You know what Christians love more than anything? Is martyrs. They're martyrs, and that's why they're there. And it's you heard the applause. I mean, this is what they love.
It's sad that businesses sometimes close, but the reality is that she chose to close her business, and she chose that because she wanted to circumvent the laws which prevent anti-gay discrimination. And the lawsuit that, by the way, they're now facing is because they're accused of breaking the law. This is like, it's sad that you lost your business because you had to write a big check to the IRS, but the reason you had to do that is because you were underreporting revenue for years. You broke tax law. It could still be sad that you closed your business, but you broke the law, Louis.
Isn't this kind of like the Bundy Ranch thing? Someone becomes a hero for breaking the law and fomenting maybe not necessarily violence, but anger and
discrimination, bigotry.
Discrimination, yeah, you name it. There are lots of heroes on that side of the political spectrum who are lawbreakers.
West Virginia has come up with a new plan which involves fracking beneath the Ohio River, which, by the way, supplies water to millions of people. 9 citizens and environmental groups are urging West Virginia Governor Earl Ray Tomblin to reconsider the plan that would let companies drill below the Ohio River for oil and natural gas, citing the now widely known concerns that drilling and fracking can contaminate the drinking water supply and increase the risk of earthquakes in this region. Louis, wasn't West Virginia the place that had flammable licorice water?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think it might have been, yes.
The groups that are opposed to this cited drilling currently taking place in a state-designated wildlife area, which some have complained about. They're saying it is unacceptably disrupting a nature preserve. And there was, of course, a chemical spill in January that did taint drinking water for 300,000 people. I just don't remember if that was I think it was the licorice water, not necessarily the flammable water, which it's insane that we can't even keep straight which place had the licorice water and which place had the flammable water. Both are things, of course, that you shouldn't have. On Friday, Tomblin opened up kind of like a request for proposal for businesses to submit proposals for drilling beneath the Ohio River. This is just utter insanity and total lack of common sense. What are we doing to our own planet, Louis?
It's all about money.
Is it? Do you think it's just driven by the profit motive?
Of course. That's all that's happening here. It's money, and money talks, and money means more to these companies and to, I guess, people in government in West Virginia than having clean water.
Yeah, and when I think about this, I was doing some research, and there were some who were saying, well, West Virginia is really in a tough spot financially. How have you mismanaged? You're supposedly fiscal conservatives. How have you mismanaged your finances so significantly that the only solution is to frack beneath the Ohio River, right? That to me says you need to replace the administration, not start fracking beneath the Ohio River.
Yeah, I think perhaps after decades of electing Democrats, you might be able to fix this without fracking, but they keep hiring Republicans, and this is what happens.
Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman. Great show for you today. Don't miss the rest of it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Remember that you can support our program by doing all of your Amazon shopping after clicking the Amazon banner on the right side of our website, davidpakman.com. We're also supported by individual members, and that membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Some statistics suggest the economy is improving in spite of having a Democratic president, but those statistics must be liberally biased. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Lars Behrenroth. Lars Behrenroth. And in conjunction with Lars, very, very important announcement, we have another David Pakman Show Membership Hall of Fame inductee, Jonathan Carbaugh. Lewis, I remember it like it was just yesterday that Jonathan Carbaugh was member of the day, a new member, wide-eyed, naive, and bushy-tailed as to what the future of the David Pakman Show would be. And now Jonathan has been with us for 4 years, the duration of an entire presidential term. And he is now in the David Pakman Show Membership Hall of Fame on the same day that Lars Behrenroth is member of the day. Go to davidpakman.com/membership and start yourself on the path to Hall of Fame membership. This is a very, very bizarre story. El Al is the main international Israeli airline. And there was an El Al flight from JFK Airport here in New York City to Tel Aviv. And it was delayed a few days ago after some ultra-Orthodox Hasidic male passengers refused to sit next to women. One passenger described the entire experience as an 11-hour ordeal. Another told YNetNews.com that the plane was prevented from taking off because people stood in the aisles and refused to go forward. Another passenger said, quote, "Although everyone had tickets with seat numbers that they purchased in advance, they asked us to trade seats with them. They even offered to pay money since they cannot sit next to a woman. It was obvious that the plane won't take off as long as they keep standing in the aisles. The pilot pleaded with them to sit down at least for takeoff so that they could get going. They did. Immediately upon takeoff, a lot of these Hasidic Jews stood up, and it was just an absolute disaster. The aisles stuffed with passengers throughout the entire flight. El Al issued a statement saying they do everything they can to give their passengers the best possible service year-round. These days bring with them a peak in air traffic to Israel, presumably because of the New Year, Rosh Hashanah. What's really frustrating to me is that we know what the solution would have been. We saw it from a Hasidic guy a few months or a year ago. All of these guys should have wrapped themselves in plastic bags so that they were not technically next to women. Wouldn't that have been the solution?
I guess if it worked for flying over graveyards, it could work for this. I'm sure they could have used their imagination to come up with something, or somehow just come up with some ridiculous way to convince themselves that it's okay to sit next to women. Maybe just because they're wearing clothing. Who knows? This
is just complete and utter insanity. And my dad went to Israel a few years ago. He flew, I believe it was US Air. Former TV director Natan went to Israel last Tuesday. We'll talk about that more on the bonus show. He flew on United, and there were no such incidents. And I know many people also that have flown on El Al and not had this issue. I would say if you are purchasing any kind of good or service from a company like El Al or any company, you cannot use your religious beliefs to dictate how the business should operate. And unfortunately, increasingly, as we see in the United States, religiosity, here it's Christianity specifically, is being used and is expected to be used as a kind of arbiter or set of rules for how private business should operate. And unfortunately, it doesn't make any sense, and it must stop immediately.
Yeah. This type of thing is complete nonsense. It would be such a nightmare to be on this plane and have to be so inconvenienced because of this made-up nonsense that these people believe.
A rabbi in Jackson, Mississippi said he was thrown out of a local restaurant due to his religion. This is Rabbi Ted Riter of the Beth Israel congregation, told local media that an employee of Raps, which is a Jackson restaurant, asked him if he wanted a full size or a Jewish size when he ordered a Greek salad. When the rabbi asked, well, what do you mean a Jewish size? The employee responded, small. Everybody knows that the Jewish size is small. The rabbi said that then the employee asked if he was Jewish, told him to leave the restaurant, accompanied by swearing and anti-Semitic slurs. When reached by local media, the restaurant owner said the rabbi didn't know exactly what he wanted, and we offered him our services. That's the extent of it. Also saying that the rabbi disrespected the business. This is one of the most unusual explanations when someone is accused of their establishment being racist or xenophobic or homophobic. This is a bizarre explanation. The guy didn't know what he wanted and he was disrespectful.
If that's the case, I think there have been disrespectful patrons in just about every restaurant, cafe I've ever been to in my life, because you're always stuck behind someone who doesn't know what they want.
Yeah, and first of all, being told to leave a restaurant because of being Jewish is a violation of federal civil rights, period. You cannot discriminate against people based on their membership in protected classes, which include religion. This type of stuff used to happen to me all the time growing up and when I was working at different places. It happens a lot less now, probably because in school, at work, you're around people that you may not necessarily choose to have as part of your social circle, whereas now I have more control over that. I would be told once when I was working at a retail store, a coworker came up to me and said, I just had the most Jewish customers. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, yeah, they were just trying to Jew me down on everything. They didn't want to pay what the sticker price was. And I said, oh, actually, I'm Jewish. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said this around you. And I said, no, actually, it's offensive regardless of whether there are Jews around. It was pretty awkward with that guy from then on. He was subsequently fired or relocated. Many times, people coming up to me in different jobs saying, I'm dealing with the cheapest Jews. This stuff, would happen all the time. I mean, the incident itself is not that surprising, but the reaction from the owner is the most bizarre element of it to me.
It seems like the owner doesn't care at all, or he's just trying to do some serious damage control here by denying that this type of discrimination ever happened, because there could be legal repercussions.
Arkansas has a firing range that has banned Muslims. Jan Morgan says she will no longer allow Muslims inside the gun range that she owns, the Gun Cave Indoor Shooting Range in Hot Springs, Arkansas. She has listed 10 reasons why people of the Islamic faith will not be allowed in her gun range. Most of the reasons have to do with the fact that she thinks all Muslims want to kill all non-Muslims. She said not all Muslims are terrorists, but almost all terrorists in the world right now are Muslim. This seems to ignore the fact that almost every instance of domestic terror in the U.S. was perpetrated by a white Christian. But putting that aside for a second, the reasons include the Quran, her being allegedly threatened by Muslims, the beheading that recently happened in Oklahoma, 2 Muslims that she alleges went to her firing range with Allah Akbar ringtones and similar stuff. Now, of course, it is against the law to refuse service based on religious beliefs, as we've seen time and time and time again. This is like a business refusing to serve Christians, which, by the way, would be front page news, Lewis, on every right-wing media outlet. However, banning Muslims at your firing range seems to only make headlines on kind of independent and more alternative news outlets. I wonder why that is, because I always hear from Christians that they're the ones being discriminated against.
Yes, a very common thing to say. This is kind of the type of behavior that, well, won't this just make Muslims hate you for being so discriminatory?
And for breaking the law?
This is the kind of behavior that just makes things worse for everyone.
I'd actually suggest she go even further. Ban anyone from using your gun range. After all, by her logic, you can't tell who's eventually going to go on a shooting spree, even white people. And as we know from statistics, white people are the most likely to commit domestic terror here in the United States. Just look it up. She should really be banning white people. I mean, if you're going to ban people based on membership in a religion, just ban people based on race too.
Why not? Yeah, I think considering that she is the owner of this range, I would feel more comfortable if nobody was going to it at all.
Yeah, same here. She should really just ban everybody. Next, we will talk to former Ku Klux Klan Grand Dragon, Scott Shepard. This is going to be an interesting interview.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Scott Shepard, who is a reformed racist and a former Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in Tennessee. Scott, I'm so interested in speaking to you, and in researching you today, I came across so many interesting things from your past, And I think an interesting place to start would be kind of your childhood. Did you grow up in what you would describe as a racist environment?
Well, yes. The community in the state that I grew up in was the state of Mississippi, which you know was a hotbed of racial turmoil back in the 60s. I was born in 1959, and grew up through those turbulent years. As far as growing up in a racist home, no, I was not taught any type of racism by my parents whatsoever.
And where did you first start to think about or consider the beliefs that ultimately led to your joining the KKK?
I think, of course, my first introduction to the Ku Klux Klan was probably third or fourth grade in school with the Mississippi history books. They went, through the turbulent years of the 60s and integration and busing, and they touched on the subject of the Ku Klux Klan. But at that time, they did not go in depth with the Ku Klux Klan and say, the Ku Klux Klan is bad or wrong. They just kind of touched over it. And of course, my research in it, and the type frame mind that I was in, as a troubled child, I picked up on the Ku Klux Klan, and my perception interpreted it as a hero organization.
So even though the school didn't present the KKK as a kind of heroic or positive organization, something about that made you start looking into the KKK on your own, is that right?
Well, sure. Of course, the school didn't make it out to be a bad thing either. So they just, like I said, they just kind of touched on the subject. And they took a neutral stand, and it was not a bad organization or a good organization.
So what did you do on your own? In other words, did you talk to people? What kind of, at the time we didn't have Google, how did you inform yourself about the KKK?
Well, I started reading a lot. Of course, I finished reading, of course, the Mississippi history books. And in my part of the country, in the state of Mississippi, it was, just common knowledge that the Klan was there, because we had the integration problems, the school problems, and the anger was really boiling over into that time. And of course, the Klan was making appearances, and I sought out the Klan due to some news reports that I saw where they were holding a rally in Tupelo, Mississippi, and I traveled to Tupelo and watched this rally. And then after watching this rally, I talked to one of the gentlemen and was later contacted by him. But that was also really kind of set up with some background of my childhood. I was in a situation where I was an unhappy child. Wasn't happy with myself. And that pretty much made me a target of the Klan tactics of recruitment.
Well, this is, the you being a target is, and based on your childhood, is exactly the story that we heard from former neo-Nazi Frank Mink. And I don't know if you know Frank at all. I've had him on the show a couple of times.
Right, I do know Frank only by Facebook. We have corresponded some, but yes, I know Frank, very good man.
And he also was able to elucidate this same kind of vulnerability that he identified in himself and others who kind of fell into the neo-Nazi mentality. When you first had this contact, what were the specific beliefs about whether it's African Americans, whether it's Jews, whatever group, what were the specific beliefs that you held that were reflected by the KKK, or did you kind of go in as a blank slate and simply kind of soak up what they taught you?
Well, I guess I kind of went in as a kind of a blank. Because the reason why, because like I said, I was a troubled child. I grew up in an alcoholic family, and went through a lot of turmoil years, dealing with that. And I was looking for a place to fit in, and this is, I believe, is a common denominator. I was looking for a place to fit in, and the Klan kind of took me under their wings and gave me a home, a sense of being and belonging. And at the time, heck, I was full of anger. I didn't like myself. I didn't like anybody. Like I said, unhappy with myself. And the Klan gave me an outlet as far as channeling my anger, and that's what I did. I kind of channeled it to the channels and the things that the Klan was teaching, and that's how I ended up with the Well, hating African Americans, and I really didn't have a problem with the Jewish issue because I grew up with Jews in my hometown, and I never really got deep into that Jewish issue. But I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't espouse some anti-Jewish words and things like that because my life's an open book. I want to be honest about it, but I was probably saying things I really didn't know what I was talking about.
So really the focus in the immediate KKK group you were a part of was specifically African Americans, it sounds like. What about Hispanics?
Well, actually, not too much Hispanics over until the later years. We started having trouble with the Hispanics crossing over into the border, and the Klan always uses these mainstream subjects of the open borders. We need to close the borders, and they try to use these subjects to portray an image that they really don't have.
And when you were part of this KKK group, did you participate in violent acts? Were criminal acts done?
Well, sure. I can sit here and say I didn't, but I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I was involved with intimidations, cross burnings on public property and private property. I really never did participate in any, I did beatings because I was there some of the times when they're present, some of the beatings. I might not have physically taken part, but I was just as guilty as the other people because I was there and I condoned it and rooted it on.
So after one of these beatings, did you always have a sense of guilt or questioning whether what you did was right? Or was there a point where you were so far in that you felt really good about the beatings that you had, not necessarily physically participated in, but had egged on?
I think I always held some guilt because I think if I had not had that guilt in the beginning, I might have participated. But I think I had some guilt because I do remember it did bother me a lot of times, that these things did happen.
Did your not physically participating ever become an issue with the other members of your KKK group? In other words, did people say, Scott, you were there, but how come you're not getting involved? Did that ever trigger any red flags for them?
No, it really didn't, because I tell you, the Klan was what they do is, and of course, if you studied them, you'll know they're into this image, this image perception that they want to change the image, make them look like they're a law-abiding Christian organization, and not that my job is any better than any job, because it's not. But I had to go to college and I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer. I had to wear a suit every day to go, to work. And this threw me into a category with Klan. I portrayed a professional look because of this. So they pretty much used me on some of the front lines as far as recruitment and things like that. And I never was part of any of the, and they did have them, elimination teams and beating teams.
Did you, it's interesting that you talk about you're a trained funeral director and embalmer. Do you think that there's any connection between the conflict you had with your immediate family as a kid and then being vulnerable and getting sucked into the KKK movement, which is also, it's a social group in a sense, but it also is very antisocial in terms of what it stands for in opposing broad groups, and then choosing a path like funeral director? In other words, do you see it all as disconnected, or is this all part of kind of your upbringing?
Well, I guess it's kind of disconnected. The funeral director and embalmer really played no part in what I did. That's just, that was something I wanted to do ever since I was about 10 years old, and I pursued it and did it. But of course, my Klan activity and things like that did cause problems with that. And along with my family also, I came disassociated with several family members. They didn't agree with the things I was doing. I was estranged from my daughter, and it caused a lot of conflict. It caused a lot of conflict and was very costly.
You talked about the desire from the KKK to be perceived as this kind of, I think you called it a straight-laced or kind of a Christian organization on the up and up. There are different views about whether the KKK is what would be considered a religious organization or not. In your experience, Was there a significant religious component, a Christian component to the KKK?
Well, I consider the KKK a cult, I'll be honest with you, but they do embrace some Christian religions, and they distort them, and some of the verses of the Bible they'll distort to make it fit to their agenda. And then they do embrace the Christian identity movement, which is nothing but a white supremacist movement and white supremacist belief based on what they consider Christianity.
Just to remind everybody, we're speaking with Scott Shepard, former Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in Tennessee. We're going to go to a break on our television and radio program. I have some more questions for Scott, including how he eventually got out of the KKK. You can find the full interview on YouTube.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week in our Friday audience question segment, we answered a question from a viewer who said, when does poor diet, from the point of view of parenting a child, become child abuse? And we generally said, sometimes you know it when you see it, but there's really no black and white rule that tells us when is poor diet child abuse. There are socioeconomic factors that can affect the diet that parents feed their kids, etc. We now have a case from Australia, from Newcastle, Australia, where a boy died from morbid obesity, and he has been determined to be the victim of medical neglect at the hands of his drug-addicted parents, while health workers and government agencies failed to enact a plan to save him. The boy weighed more than 176 pounds when he died in the hospital at age 10, and we now know that the parents have been determined to be medically neglectful. He had been rushed to the hospital 12 days earlier, where he suffered a catastrophic brain injury after he stopped breathing. And there were numerous efforts outlined to try to turn around the diet of the boy, to try to figure out what kind of an intervention could be done here. And Louis, it's interesting, we talked about this last week. We now have this example of a very specific case where someone died, a kid died from morbid obesity, and it was indeed neglect from the parents. How should we evaluate the fact that they were drug addicted? Is that exculpatory in some way, or is that simply more reason to hold the parents accountable?
Certainly quite a different situation from parents that that have their stuff together, appear to be completely normal, treat their child well, except for being completely ignorant about what they're feeding him and the child's overall health. In a case like this, I think it's a lot easier to point to the parents and say, this is neglect, these parents are abusive, because they have these vices that seem to control their lives.
Should the parents be charged with a misdemeanor, felony? Should it be manslaughter?
At the very least, manslaughter, yeah.
You would consider murder charges here?
How could you not? I mean, this is, you see your kid getting larger, you feed your child chocolate and truffles and, McDonald's solely, and your child already has terrible medical problems because of this, and you do nothing except you keep doing drugs. I mean, it kind of seems like murder to me. Slow murder.
The thing is, it's a death due to neglect, and typically when it is a death due to neglect, it doesn't go towards murder. Although, when I think about it, the times when it's an exception to that rule is often when it is children.
Exactly. That is usually the one exception. Will it probably end up being something like manslaughter? Yes.
All right. Send me your thoughts on this. Do you believe in as harsh a charge as Lewis? Or do you believe that there should be more consideration given to the fact that these people were ill, right? They were addicted to drugs and illness. Send me your thoughts. We'll follow up on this. We now have the whistleblowing testimony from an atheist student who says that a teacher tried to force him to stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance against his will, or face punishment for continuing to refuse. This is a 9th grade student who attends Right Choices Alternative School in Beaufort County, South Carolina, contacted the American Humanist Association after being subjected to constant harassment and the threat of punishment for choosing not to stand and not to recite the Pledge of Allegiance because he objects to the words "under God." Here is the write-up about the letter sent to the American Humanist Association. The student in question is an atheist and does not wish to participate in the pledge exercise in any manner because he objects to the "under God" language and feels that any level of participation in the exercise validates the theistic affirmation. As such, he has attempted to simply sit at his desk during the exercise in an undisruptive manner. When he has done this, however, he has been instructed by his teacher to stand and has been disciplined when he has refused to do so. Of course, the Supreme Court, Lewis, has consistently ruled that compelling people to recite the Pledge of Allegiance violates the First Amendment, and this actually dates back to a ruling from 1943. The case was West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. Forcing anyone to recite the Pledge of Allegiance encroaches on the individual's freedom of religion and speech. Remember, Lewis, that just last month, there was this mayor in Florida who had a citizen removed because he wouldn't stand during the Pledge of Allegiance. However, we also have to remember that even the words "under God" were something that was added more recently to the Pledge of Allegiance. We know that in 1892, when the first pledge was written, it did not contain the words "under God." It was officially adopted in 1943. It did not contain the words "under God." Now it does, and this teacher deserves to be fired at the least, and we have just a very clear violation of the student's First Amendment rights here.
Yes, "under God" was added in 1954, and I applaud this student for standing up to the teacher.
The student is in a position of disproportionately little power here. The student is making themselves even more of a target by not only not standing, but then by writing a letter. And I remember, Lewis, when we were in middle school, I think it never happened. In high school, I know that there was no pledge, but in elementary school, there would be a pledge. And I remember that it was kind of unthinkable not to stand. And every once in a while, someone wouldn't stand. I think typically it was Jehovah's Witnesses who would say, we don't participate in any of this. So their religion was actually the only thing that made it so they didn't have to stand and say "under God." And I just stood, and I never said it, but I just kind of pretended to and mouthed it silently or something like that. It was not a routine that I liked at all.
It has been a very long time since I've had to do that. And at the time, I just didn't even think about it. You just did it, and I didn't even think about what the words meant or what I was saying. I was so young. All I could think about was, when's recess?
Right. And will I be sent down to the principal's office today, which often was the case.
Yes, that happened very frequently, and it was that was fun too.
Any comments, questions, complaints, concerns, criticisms, or hate mail? Call us, 219-2-DAVID-P. Leave a voicemail. Here is one voicemail about the Elizabeth Warren-Hillary Clinton discussion we had yesterday.
Well, the difference between Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton would be Barack Obama, basically, with better messaging. That's what her presidency would be. This is a continuation of what's going on now. Elizabeth Warren, on the other hand, would be Roosevelt in a dress. She'd be really good. And I do believe she has a chance to win. I don't think she'll run, though, because I think that she doesn't want to take the chance of what that would do to her life. But I really wish she would. And I kind of really wish Bernie Sanders would give it a real shot instead of just trying to push the candidates more to the left. Actually get in there and run.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think there is no question that Hillary Clinton is probably even more conservative than President Obama, and that's only comparing what they said when they were campaigning against each other. If Hillary Clinton were to become president, my expectation would be that she would become even more conservative. 219-2-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. On today's bonus show, we will talk about the so-called bending of the new iPhones. We'll talk about a new method of dealing with the mafia in Italy. And is beer good for the brain? Lewis will tell us about all of those stories and more. If you're not getting the bonus show, you really should. Go to davidpakman.com/membership. Unlike the shows you watch on corporate TV, we depend directly on individuals like you who say, I am going to support what the David Pakman Show is doing. So please go to davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up as a member, get the bonus show and all of the other great member benefits.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.